needed to attain our development priorities and aspirations. Mr. President, we are embarking on growing our economy from the current $31 billion per year to $57 billion by 2030, and aim to create an additional 1 million jobs countrywide. This will be catalyzed by the diversification of our economy from the non-renewable sector driven by mining, oil and gas to complementary support from the renewable sectors, including notably in agriculture, fisheries, the service sector, and concrete support for our small to medium-sized enterprises in the informal and formal sector, and providing the infrastructure necessary together with investment in education and health, and special economic zones with incentives for productive investment to propel our country forward. This National Development Plan, together with our overall long-term Vision 2050 Strategic Development Roadmap, provides the cornerstone for the future we want. These will deliver for us on improving the quality of life for our people, the country's prosperity, peace and security, and better environmental protection and climate change, mitigation and adaptation, as well as enabling Papua New Guinea to become an upper middle income country by 2030 and to improve by 2050 our Human Development Index global rating. Our Medium-Term Development Plan 4 also integrates and reaffirms my country's strong commitment to accelerate and deliver on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which at present remains a serious concern for us because of the global polycrisis impact domestically and our own national challenges. We are determined to ensure that our new development roadmap is a springboard for progressive implementation of the 2030 Agenda in a more comprehensive, focused, resourceful, and accountable way. Mr. President, Papua New Guinea has prioritized health as a core national development agenda, as spelled out in our new 4th Medium-Term Development Plan and the National Health Plan 2021 to 2030, supported by relevant policies. It underlines our commitment to universal health coverage and quality and affordable health care by focusing on people and the environment, engaging with social partners and sectors, and increasing access to quality and affordable health services. This followed our 2020 National Review of the Health System that highlighted the need for review and reform of policies and laws on health issues in the country, and for a stronger health system to cater for our people's basic health needs and to achieve universal health coverage by 2030. It underscored the importance of multi-stakeholder approach to strengthening existing partnerships and building new ones, to mobilize resources, appropriate technologies, and financial support, including capacity building and training opportunities to deliver the health outcomes we need for our people and our country. The necessity to ensure effective governance and accountability in the health sector, including transparency and proper oversight in procurement procedures and processes and delivery mechanisms, which are vital, including for eliminating overhead costs and malpractices in the health sector. For us, major health challenges remain in the prevention and control of communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases, and on reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health. Tuberculosis also remains a serious concern in our country, and we continue to witness increasing lifestyle and cancer-related deaths in recent years. However, the health review and reforms and strategic privatization has made positive impacts, including in transforming our national health system and focus on training more medical staff, including doctors and nurses. But much more work remains to be done. We therefore welcome development partnership in the health sector, which is crucial for us given the limited health-related experts, institutional and systemic capacity and resources that continue to challenge the effective delivery of healthcare and services to our people, especially the rural majority. We look forward to harnessing the outcomes of the just concluded 3 health-related high-level meetings to support a recovery from the pandemic and to deliver on SDG 3 in the country. Mr. President, the importance of partnerships for national development, including on the SDGs, especially in a challenging global situation such as today, cannot be overstated. We therefore welcome genuine and durable partnerships from all stakeholders at all levels in supporting our development priorities and aspirations, including for the SDGs. In our view, however, development partnerships should be based on an equal footing rather than a donor-recipient lens that undervalues recipient countries' contributions. This will help build trust, confidence, and enhance effective development partnerships. For Papua New Guinea, strategic development partnership is recognized in Pillar 12 of our new medium-term development plan 4. We call on all our development partners to ensure that their official development assistance to Papua New Guinea is aligned under this framework with our own national development agenda priorities that averts unnecessary parallel efforts and for cost-effective partnerships for mutually beneficial outcomes to be achieved. Let me also use this occasion to acknowledge and thank all our valued development partners for their constructive partnerships and support for my country's development efforts. We look forward to further strengthening the cooperative relations going forward. Mr. President, financing for development remains a serious challenge for us, as it is for many other developing countries, including from the pandemic aftermath. The growing divide between countries that can access affordable financing for development and those that cannot is a serious concern that must be addressed swiftly if we are genuine about leaving no one behind. We also note the outcomes of the high-level meeting on financing for development and the SDG summit held at leaders level earlier this week, and that strongly support the call by the United Nations Secretary General for a US $500 billion annual SDG stimulus to support developing countries. This is a most timely and relevant given the challenging development circumstances the world is currently facing. If realized, accessing such funding support to developing states should be at speed, scale, and be less onerous. Mr. President, for my country, we need around $26 billion in the next 5 years to grow our national economy to reach our development aspirations of $57 billion per year economy, to take us progressively into the future, including delivering on our SDG commitment. According to the International Financial System and other pundits, Papua New Guinea is rated to be at a high debt risk given our debt to GDP ratio. We recognize this concern. However, we need to fund our development framework and its effective implementation to cater for our growing population demands. We are taking leadership and ownership of our domestic resource mobilization, including financing our development priorities through measures such as tax reforms and enhanced internal revenue collection, strengthening governance laws and policies to tide illicit financial flows, addressing systemic issues on foreign exchange, reviewing and revising our domestic laws and policies to ensure that our natural resources development in the extractive industry is on fair, just, and equitable terms, incentivizing public service partnership and supporting SMSEs in the formal and informal sectors. This has enabled us to provide a core funding for development, which is complemented by a small fraction of external financial support from our development partners. We are also working with the IMF and other bilateral development partners to move from a deficit budget to a more balanced one to cushion the impact of debt servicing on the delivery of our development needs. Mr. President, we must ensure that the financial resources needed to progress our national development agenda, including for the SDGs, are accessible, affordable, and delivered on a sustained basis that is predictable for countries to access. We also welcome development financing partnerships through debt for nature swaps. As an important tool to address our debt issues, while conserving our natural ecosystems. We cannot afford to sacrifice our people's development needs by merely conserving our natural resources without appropriate incentives to cater for their needs. Let me also underscore that it is not enough to demand countries to fix their domestic systems to support their development financing. It is also crucial that we must effectively and urgently address the existing shortcomings of the international financial system that continue to be a bane to the financing for development needs of developing countries like my own. We therefore join other countries and the Secretary General to call for the urgent and comprehensive reform of the international financial architecture to address the economic and financial challenges facing developing nations, especially small island developing states just like mine. Mr. President, Papua New Guinea further calls on the international financial institutions and development partners to use the final report and recommendations of the high-level panel of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index as a tool to adequately account for the key factors of vulnerability, such as the adverse impacts of climate change and natural disasters, into their decision-making, rather than relying on the GDP, GNI per capita as the sole measure of a country's development. We also strongly support the Bridgetown Initiative as a part of the reform of the global financial system to improve the response to the climate crisis and the particular development challenges, including access to affordable financing and debt relief. Mr. President, an ongoing concern for my country in the context of financing for development is the unintended consequences arising from anti-money laundering laws from the international perspective. As a small economy that is primarily rural and cash-based, anti-money laundering laws impede development growth in my country. We need to ensure that the application of one-size-fits-all money laundering laws does not continue to be a hindrance to the economic growth and sustainable developments of small developing countries like ours. This, however, does not imply our derogation of duties in upholding the rule of law, but rather to ensure the financing we need for national development does not become a victim of such laws. Mr. President, the ongoing extreme and increasingly tragic weather and slow onset events multiplied across the world, which Secretary General Guterres aptly called the era of global boiling, has arrived, emphasizes to all of us the critical need to confront and address the climate crisis swiftly. From our highlands region to the coastal lowlands and offshore in our island communities, the ravages of the climate crisis, as seen in natural disasters, droughts, sea level rise, and food insecurity, and also the impact on our economy, continues unabated despite our negligible greenhouse gas emissions. This provided the backdrop to our own second National Climate Summit held last week in our capital with our development partners on what we must do nationally and with other stakeholders going forward. We applaud the United Nations Secretary General's strong and dedicated leadership on climate change, including for the Climate Ambition Summit held earlier this week. We also commend United Arab Emirates and Egypt as incoming and outgoing COP presidents, respectively, for the ministerial meeting on loss and damage, and look forward to further engage on it at COP28. Mr. President, for Papua New Guinea, like many of our fellow Pacific Island countries, let me reiterate our position that climate change is a key priority for us, as this remains the single greatest existential threat to the lives and livelihoods, security, and well-being of our people. The critical importance and urgency to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees through rapid, deep, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions cannot be overstated enough. This is critical to the survival of our smaller island nations in the Pacific. That is why Papua New Guinea strongly supported our Melanesian neighbor Vanuatu's landmark General Assembly resolution adopted last March on an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on climate change and look forward to its outcome. As host to 7% of the world's biodiversity, Papua New Guinea has an important role, and our evolving national plans, policies, legislations, and partnerships on climate change underscores this strong commitment. This is reflected yet again in our new medium-term development plan 4, Strategic Priority Area 10 on climate change and natural environment protection. Mr. President, Papua New Guinea is indeed pleased to note that we have made much national progress on the climate change front, which we take pride in, given our efforts so far as implementing our targets under the nationally determined contributions. At the Climate Ambition Summit, Papua New Guinea announced our national commitments towards a 1.5 degrees global temperature goal and for climate justice. In brief, these included, inter alia, our milestone achievement in June 2022 of our 2050 net zero target, the completion and launching early in the year our 2022-2030 National Adaptation Plan on climate-resilient agriculture, infrastructure and transport, and health sector responsiveness to climate-sensitive diseases, and the political commitments to use our marine and terrestrial natural resources to address climate change, including for just transition to renewable energy. Mr. President, we therefore call again on, firstly, high carbon emitting nations and developed country economies to do better, much, much more better. Secondly, developed countries must urgently deliver on their climate finance commitment of USD 100 billion per year and ensure that the distribution of these funds is equitable, accessible, and timely. Thirdly, for international financial institutions and development partners, including the Green Climate Fund, to ensure that countries like mine have timely access to climate finance for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage in order to accomplish just transition and ensure resilience against the effects of climate change. Fourthly, we welcome international support for investments in downstream processing of our natural resources to make the transformation we need to further support our enhanced climate ambition for the global temperature goal and for climate justice. At the Pacific regional level, Papua New Guinea urges the international community to contribute to the Pacific Resilience Facility, a regional financing facility set up to address disasters and climate change threats in our blue Pacific continent, and thank our development partners who have contributed to it. As a maritime nation, Papua New Guinea's commitment to protecting and sustainably using the ocean and seas and its resources remains steadfast. Our medium-term development plan for Strategic Priority Areas 10 on climate change and natural environment protection underscores this point. Not only does the ocean serve as a vital source for carbon sink, but it is also our main source for economic benefits, revenue generation, and daily sustenance of food and income for our people and our communities. As an example, our water supply 18% of the global tuna catch and 15% of the global tuna trade. We therefore strongly support and welcome the milestone adoption in June this year of the new global treaty on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond natural jurisdiction. We are pleased to have contributed to ensuring important areas for us were accounted for in the treaty, such as high seas pockets, extended continental shelf, rights to fisheries and capacity building, and transfer of marine technology. Mr. President, the BBNJ Treaty also complements our own National Protected Areas Policy and National Oceans Policy, as well as our Pacific Regional 2050 Strategy for the Blue Pacific Continent. We thank Singapore for their strategic and able leadership as President of the process and commend also the international community rallying to support the BBNJ Treaty. successfully after nearly 2 decades of intensive negotiations. We look forward to the treaty's early implementation. We are therefore encouraged and impressed by the high number of countries that signed the BBNJ Treaty 4 days ago at the UN Treaty event. We commend and congratulate those countries. Papua New Guinea will sign the new BBNJ Treaty once our own domestic procedural and legal processes are completed. Mr. President, Papua New Guinea also supports the convening of the next UN conference on SDG 14 on ocean and seas, led by France and Costa Rica. We are also supportive of the global efforts for a new binding global instrument on plastic pollution to further protect our marine ecosystem, and will do our part to see this to a successful conclusion and eventual implementation. Also, as an integral part of our stewardship of the ocean and seas, my government hosted the biennial 8 Pacific Tuna Forum 16 days ago, supported by our fellow Pacific countries, including our regional and sub-regional organizations, the private sector and academia, where the current status of the tuna industry in our region and its sustainability was discussed. Papua New Guinea, like many other small island developing states, is increasingly concerned with the rising sea levels related to climate change that is threatening the lives and livelihoods of not just our coastal communities and the country's land territories and consequent economic and other losses, but more fundamentally, the human rights of our people affected by sea level rising. Existing international law does not address this serious concern. We welcome the ongoing important work of the International Law Commission on this issue, and we are committed to contributing further to it. In view of this, Papua New Guinea, together with our fellow Pacific Island Forum members, are progressing efforts for another landmark forum leaders' declaration on statehood and protection of persons in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. We look forward to its adoption later this year by our forum leaders. We call on our development partners to work closely with us in equal partnership in further strengthening the protection and sustainable use of the oceans and the seas. Mr. President, at a time of challenging global and national circumstances, given the evolving multiple crises, the protection and promotion of human rights, particularly for women and girls and those in vulnerable situations, must remain central for the international community. For Papua New Guinea, we have a strong commitment to this important issue. This is aptly demonstrated most recently by our Medium-Term Development Plan 4, under Strategic Priority Area 11 on population, youth, and women's empowerment. These entails increasing the gender parity index for females in education, employment, and business, combating incidences of gender-based violence, and to quadruple the number of women in leadership. These priority activities will require an investment of about $50 million to deliver the much-needed results by 2027. We are also continuing to work through our bipartisan parliamentary committee on gender-based violence, led by 7 members of Parliament, with the welcome and valued support and partnership of the European Union and the UN system, particularly UN Women, UNFPA, and UNDP, under the Spotlight Initiative, which was launched in March 2020. This addresses evidence-based approach to unequal power relations between men and women, with focus on gender equality and women's empowerment. We have made good progress in areas including reforms in laws and policies and justice, health and community sector services, policing, medical and socio-psychological services, accessing legal support services, and shelters for gender-based violence survivors. However, much more work remains to be done, and we are committed to doing our bit and part going forward. We are also working with the UN Human Rights Treaty bodies on our outstanding report on the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. We thank our valued development partners in these efforts, and also welcome others to join us to strengthening human rights in general, and more specifically for our women and girls. Mr. President, the urgency and the need for a new agenda for peace, as called by the UN Secretary General in his Our Common Agenda, is timely, and its importance for the peace and security of the world cannot be overstated. Papua New Guinea strongly supports the Secretary General's call. This has given the sobering and increasingly worrisome disrespect for international law, including the UN Charter by certain states, the geopolitical tensions and divide, simmering and unresolved conflicts, associated human rights violations, escalating nuclear weapons threats, and mistrust between and within countries. Without peace and security, our development aspirations under the 2030 Agenda and our respective development frameworks will be that much more difficult to achieve. This is a recipe for catastrophic outcomes that none of us would want. Mr. President, never again must we repeat the horrors of the two world wars. We are seriously concerned about moves by certain countries for the use of nuclear weapons. Such threats are unacceptable and therefore condemned in the strongest possible terms. It is incumbent on all of us to rally together in peaceful dialogue as common humanity under the banner of the United Nations to responsibly address all these issues. For my country, peace and security issues are a priority, and this is addressed through the law and justice sector under our medium-term development plan, strategic priority areas 5 and 6. Our strong commitment to peace and security has enabled us to increase funding and investment for capacity building and training in our country on our law and justice sector. For us, our founding foreign policy of friends to all and enemies to none continues to be a guide in our foreign relations conduct. Our national interests are economic, trade, and friendly relations with all nations. We are not interested in taking sides. Papua New Guinea has also learned from our own internal situations the importance of peace by peaceful means. It is in this spirit that we continue to engage in our Bougainville peace process, which remains a high priority for our country. It continues to be addressed under the parameters of our Constitution and the mutually agreed peace process roadmap that can deliver for us peaceful and lasting political solutions. We are grateful for the continuing valued and constructive support of the UN system, including the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund and other development partners in the Bougainville peace process, and also for the other new initiatives in 2 other parts of our country. On UN reforms, we are supportive of efforts towards meaningful reform of the United Nations to address today's realities and to account better for the greater good of everyone, such as that in the General Assembly, revitalization, and the intergovernmental negotiations process to reform the Security Council. We, however, cannot afford to have lengthy and inconclusive reform processes such as that of the IGN on Security Council reforms. This must do better, much better. Mr. President, before I conclude, as a SIDS member, we recognize the important efforts towards a SIDS-specific program of action for the next decade and the convening of the 4th International Conference on SIDS in Antigua and Barbuda next May. We join other SIDS in calling on development partners and the international community, including for funding to support SIDS, chart the pathway forward for resilient prosperity and the future we want. Finally, I reaffirm Papua New Guinea's commitment to doing our part in upholding the principles and purposes of the Charter of the United Nations as sovereign equal with other nations. May God bless us all and the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you, the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Immigration, Lands and Physical Planning of Papua New Guinea. I now give the floor to His Excellency Jaykhun Bayramov, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I congratulate His Excellency Mr. Denis Francis on assuming the presidency of the 78th session of the General Assembly, and thank the ongoing President, His Excellency Mr. Csaba Kőrösi, for his hard work over the past year. Ladies and gentlemen, the world continues to face a multitude of challenges that transcend boundaries. From exacerbating climate change trends to rooted poverty, rising tensions, and ravaging pandemics, these challenges plague us all, regardless of our background or location, and require bold and concerted actions. The current state of international politics is becoming increasingly fragmented, leading to division and erosion of multilateralism. The growing trend of intolerance and discrimination, in particular Islamophobia, and alarming surge in hate speech are disturbing. To curb this challenge, with centuries-long tradition of diversity and multiculturalism, Azerbaijan firmly believes in fostering dialogue, mutual understanding, and respect among different cultures and religions. The government of Azerbaijan has consistently promoted intercultural and interfaith dialogue through significant global initiatives such as the Baku Process and Peace for Culture. Amidst the growing challenges, it is paramount that the United Nations continue to galvanize international solidarity and cooperation. The UN has a mandate to ensure that every nation has an equal voice and is treated on the same footing. The UN Charter principles and purposes are binding worldwide and must be applied consistently, not selectively. Azerbaijan advocates for a reinvigorated and reformed multilateral system with the UN as at its core, underpinned by strict adherence to and non-selective application of the norms and principles of international law. We look forward to the summit of the future as an opportunity to reinvigorate global action and reflect on collective commitment to the UN Charter and multilateralism. Excellencies, in its national capacity and as the chair of the non-aligned movement, Azerbaijan continues contributing to peace, security, and global sustainable development agenda, and spares no effort to promote international solidarity and multilateralism. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, Azerbaijan has been at the forefront, putting forward several global initiatives to fight this challenge. The lingering effects of the pandemic create a pressing need to redouble our efforts for global cooperation and solidarity, anchored in high-level political engagement and collaboration involving all vital stakeholders. International cooperation and political engagement require involvement of different stakeholders, including women and youth. Azerbaijan made this a key focus point of its NAM chairmanship through the foundation of the NAM Youth Organization with a permanent secretariat in Baku under the Shusha Accord and initiation of the establishment of the NAM Women Platform. Azerbaijan also spearheaded the foundation of the NAM Parliamentary Network. We must strengthen joint effort in tackling the pandemic's consequences and consolidate efforts for global recovery from COVID-19. In light of this, the President of Azerbaijan initiated establishing a UN high-level panel on post-pandemic global recovery. In March 2023, we hosted the NAM Contact Group Summit in response to COVID-19, where the President of Azerbaijan, in his capacity as the NAM chair, declared two global calls to support the post-pandemic recovery of Africa and small island developing states. Azerbaijan announced allocation to each of these calls as the first donor. Since 2020, Azerbaijan provided humanitarian, economic, and technical assistance worth of $300 million to over 130 nations. Ladies and gentlemen, as we approach the midterm of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, many parts of the world struggle to achieve our shared vision of future. It is imperative that we concertedly confront these challenges. Since their adoption, Azerbaijan has been a passionate supporter of promoting and implementing the SDGs universally. We have been pursuing transformational changes in remodeling our economy, focusing on sustainability, inclusive growth, social justice, and clean energy. Azerbaijan's GDP has tripled in less than 2-decade span. Poverty went down from 49% to 5%. The external public debt is expected to be some 10% of the GDP for 2023, one of the lowest globally. The clean environment and green growth became one of the 5 priority areas of our new national development strategy. Azerbaijan voluntarily pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 40% by 2050 and established a green energy zone in its Karabakh and eastern Zangezur regions. Azerbaijan's roles in global energy security has further expanded from traditional crude oil supplier into a reliable natural gas provider. With the completion of the Southern Gas Corridor, the biggest infrastructure project in Europe, Azerbaijan is now the natural gas supplier of 5 more European countries in a time when European energy security faces unprecedented challenges. Currently 7 countries receive natural gas from Azerbaijan, and in the near future this will increase to 10 European countries. The projected increase in renewable electricity production will allow Azerbaijan to become an exporter of green electricity to European countries through the landmark trans-regional Black Sea submarine cable project that Azerbaijan embarks on with partner countries. Azerbaijan is also a key player in the development of trans-regional connectivity projects. In 2022, we have increased the transit flow by 70% through boosting investments in transportation infrastructure and widening cooperation with our regional partners. Mr. President, despite unprecedented suffering, deprivation, and devastation that the people of Azerbaijan were subjected to due to the 30-year-long military occupation, Azerbaijan initiated normalization agenda and offered peace to Armenia based on equal and reciprocal respect for legitimate interests of both sides through mutual recognition of and respect for each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and inviolability of borders. Over the past few months, thanks to concerted efforts of international partners, negotiations have intensified and yielded limited but promising results. Yet, what we observe is replication by Armenia of the past pattern to imitate talks, backtrack from previously undertaken commitments at the last minute, and commit political, military, and other provocations at every negotiation stage to evade taking concrete decisions. As such, the efforts for durable peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia have again become hostage to Armenia's policy of revanchism. For almost 3 years, since November 2020, more than 10,000 strong armed formations equipped with heavy offensive weaponry were sustained by Armenia in the sovereign soil of Azerbaijan, including by abusing the Lachen Road in an attempt to fuel separatism. In this period, while being engaged in negotiations, we have been consistently drawing the attention of all international actors involved into the normalization process and the wider international community to the serious threat stemming from the non-fulfillment of Armenia's commitment and urging for peaceful solution. While our legitimate and fact-based concerns were acknowledged behind the closed doors, it failed to be translated into real steps and targeted public messages to persuade Armenia to honor its commitments. Consequently, Armenia felt emboldened and once again fell into the illusion that it would be better off by opting for status quo based on illegal military presence and line of contact logic in the sovereign territory of Azerbaijan. Armenia further embarked on igniting tension through a global campaign of manipulation and disinformation, targeting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and blatantly interfering with internal affairs. For months now, Armenia mobilized all available resources for a manipulation campaign based on fabricated allegations of blockade, humanitarian crisis, or ethnic cleansing. For this purpose, Armenia recklessly politicized and essentially abstracted the delivery of goods to the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan for its agenda of separatism and blocked consistent efforts of several international actors to find legitimate and practical solutions through dialogue. On September 18, simultaneous delivery of humanitarian goods through Agdam and Lachin, which was offered by Azerbaijan months ago and positively received by all involved international actors, was finally conducted by the ICRC, as Armenia had to withdraw its weeks-long obstructions. Azerbaijan, like wider international community, welcomed this development, hoping that it would finally lead to the escalation on the ground and pave the way for restoring the focusing on pressing issues pertinent to interstate normalization. Yet Armenia failed to meet these expectations for yet another time, and resorted to military provocation in an attempt to continue its blame game against Azerbaijan. Thus, one day later, mine planting by Armenian sabotage group led to tragic deaths of 6 Azerbaijani citizens, 2 civilians and 4 police officers in 2 separate mine explosions. Other 6 police officers were seriously injured. In response, Azerbaijan launched local counter-terror measures to neutralize illegal armed formations, to preserve its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to protect the safety and security of its residents. These measures were limited and proportionate, exclusively aimed at neutralizing legitimate military targets by using high-precision ammunition in full compliance with norms of humanitarian law. All measures were taken to avoid collateral damage. In less than 24 hours, the horrific scale of illegal militarization of territories of Azerbaijan became clear, with neutralization of more than 90 military outposts, 20 combat vehicles, 40 artillery pieces, 30 mortars, 6 electromagnetic warfare systems, and 2 anti-aircraft missile systems. More evidence is being collected now as disarmament continues on the ground. No sovereign state would tolerate illegal military presence on its soil, nor did Azerbaijan. The counter-terror measures taken by Azerbaijan achieved the set goals. Armenia and its subordinate illegal regime were forced to agree to disarm, disband all illegal structures, and withdraw from Azerbaijan. The reason why it did not happen peacefully lies in brazen disregard by Armenia and lack of adequate action by involved third-party facilitators. Excellencies, as counter-terror measures halted, Azerbaijan has now embarked on practical implementation of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration efforts on the ground. The long overdue meeting of the Special Representative of the Government of Azerbaijan with representatives of Armenian residents finally took place on September 21 in the city of Yevlakh. The dialogue will continue as a format to directly discuss the plans of the government for reintegration, as well as to address the issues related to restoration and operation of infrastructures and the delivery of humanitarian goods for public services. The central government institutions have expeditiously started to implement necessary humanitarian support measures. All efforts have now been mobilized to address the immediate needs of the local civilians. On this point, I wish to reiterate that Azerbaijan is determined to reintegrate ethnic Armenian residents of the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan as equal citizens. The constitution, the national legislation of Azerbaijan, and the international commitments we have undertaken provide the solid ground to this end. Excellencies, despite all serious challenges stemming from Armenia's destructive position, Azerbaijan once again reaffirms its readiness for a genuine dialogue and negotiations with Armenia on the basis of equal and reciprocal respect for each other's legitimate interests. We continue to firmly believe that there is a historic opportunity for both Azerbaijan and Armenia to establish good neighborly relations and coexist side by side in peace as 2 sovereign states within their internationally recognized borders. It is high time to seize this opportunity. For that, it is necessary for Armenia to finally realize that rejecting the offer for just and equal peace in expectation of better conditions in the future to achieve revanchist purposes is not viable and has no chance to succeed. Verbal statements by the leadership of Armenia on recognizing the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, including the Karabakh region, must be transformed into tangible steps. Meaningful engagement by international actors that are able and willing to support Azerbaijan and Armenia in this hour in a fair, impartial, and unbiased manner is critical. It is equally important for all those who are unable to be an honest broker to refrain from projecting their short-sighted agendas into this process. All efforts need to be mobilized to build upon the already achieved progress and finalize the normalization process without further delay. Azerbaijan is determined and steadfast to promote the normalization agenda. Mr. President, along with the interstate process of normalization with Armenia, Azerbaijan launched a large-scale rehabilitation and reconstruction efforts to eliminate the harsh consequences of the 30-year-long military occupation of our territories. These activities aim at ensuring the right of hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis to eventually exercise their violated right to safe and dignified return. Thanks to the tireless efforts taken by the government, life now returns to the territories that have experienced unprecedented vandalism in 30 years of Armenia's military occupation. The first groups of displaced families have already returned to their places of origin. Regretfully, the massive contamination of territories of Azerbaijan with landmines and other explosive devices remains a significant obstacle to smooth progress of rehabilitation and reconstruction. This contamination is posing a threat to those returning home after being displaced for 3 decades. The refusal of Armenia to share all maps of mined areas and the continued planting of landmines, installation of booby traps and other explosives, even after the declaration of cessation of all military activities, further aggravates the situation and increases the human toll. Since November 2020, 315 individuals have fallen victim to landmines planted by Armenia. Some mines were transferred to the territory of Azerbaijan and planted therein after the signing of the trilateral statement. Given the ongoing landmine problem in Azerbaijan and the challenges national agencies face in addressing it, there is an urgent need for increased international support to strengthen Azerbaijan's humanitarian mine action capacity. Such support would not only aid in demining effort but also contribute to the global campaign against landmines and demonstrate a commitment to peace and cooperation in the region. Dear colleagues, ensuring justice concerning serious war crimes and crimes against humanity is vital in healing the wounds of the past conflict. While accountability and redress ensure the rights and interests of the victims, they are also critical prerequisites on the path to genuine post-conflict normalization and reconciliation. Over more than 30 years of aggression and occupation, Armenia subjected Azerbaijani cultural heritage to desecration and destruction. This included numerous monuments of world and national importance: mosques, temples, mausoleums, museums, art galleries, archaeological sites, and libraries. The fate of almost 4,000 citizens of Azerbaijan, including 719 civilians who went missing during the conflict. Although several mass graves were discovered in the liberated territories, shedding light on the willful killing of Azerbaijani civilians and other persons protected under international humanitarian law, Armenia refuses to clarify the whereabouts of missing persons. Resolving this issue is essential not only in terms of accountability and the rights of the victims and their families, but also for post-conflict reconciliation and normalization. From 1987 to 1991, Armenia forcefully expelled some 300,000 Azerbaijanis from their ancestral homeland in blatant violation of international law. All Azerbaijani settlements and toponyms in Armenia were renamed, and our historical and cultural heritage deliberately was vandalized and destroyed. Despite repeated calls by the Western Azerbaijani community to launch a dialogue and ensure a safe and dignified return to the homeland, the government of Armenia denies them exercising the fundamental right of return enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention relating to the status of refugees, and other important international acts. While remaining committed to its international obligations and open to constructive dialogue, Azerbaijan will not tolerate violations of international law and will continue taking appropriate steps at international level. In particular, Azerbaijan's initiation of judicial proceedings to hold Armenia accountable for grave violations of international human rights law and to bring to justice those responsible for crimes is a significant step toward achieving accountability. Azerbaijan is fully committed to the objective of a peaceful, secure, stable, and prosperous South Caucasus. We will continue the efforts towards advancing post-conflict peace-building, reintegration, and peaceful coexistence, while, as a responsible actor, sparing no effort in all relevant domains, be it post-COVID recovery, global development agenda, or energy security. The challenges we face today require a new commitment to international cooperation and solidarity. It is only through joint efforts that we can overcome present and future complex challenges to build a brighter future for ourselves and coming generations. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan. I now give the floor to His Excellency Sergei Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Уважаемый господин председатель.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in the statements of many previous speakers, the idea that our shared planet is experiencing irreversible changes was mentioned right in front of our eyes. There is a new world order being born. Our future is being shaped by a struggle between the global majority in favor of a fairer distribution of global benefits and civilized diversity, and between the few who wield neocolonial methods of subjugation in order to maintain their domination, which is slipping through their hands. The collective West has a calling card, and it has long been to reject the principle of equality and their total inability to reach agreement. Being used to looking down at the rest of the world, Americans and Europeans make all sorts of promises, and they take on commitments inter alia, written ones and legally binding ones, and then they just don't fulfill them. As President Putin pointed out, the West is one that is truly an empire of lies. Russia, like many countries, knows about this firsthand. In 1945, when we, along with Washington and London, together were vanquishing the enemy on the front in the Second World War, our allies in the anti-Hitler coalition were already making plans for a unthinkable military operation. That's what it was called, against the Soviet Union. 4 years later, in 1949, the Americans drafted a drop shot operation to make mass-scale nuclear strikes on the USSR. These ghastly, senseless ideas did remain on paper. The USSR created its own weaponized retaliation. It took the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when the world was on the brink of nuclear war, for the idea of deploying it, and the illusion of victory stopped being the basis of the military planning strategy of the US. At the end of this Cold War, the Soviet Union plays a decisive role in reuniting Germany and agreed upon parameters for the new security architecture in Europe. Furthermore, the Soviet and then the Russian leadership was given concrete political assurances regarding the non-expansion of the NATO military alliance to the east. The relevant records of these negotiations are both in our and Western archives, and they're in open access. But these assurances by Western leaders were just deception. They in no way intended to uphold them. Furthermore, they were never bothered by the fact that by expanding NATO towards Russia's borders, they violated official commitments that were made at the highest level in the OSCE. Commitments not to strengthen their own security to the detriment of the security of others, and not to permit a military political domination in Europe of any country, group of countries, or organization. In 2021, our proposals to conclude treaties on mutual security guarantees in Europe were rudely rejected without any change to the status of Ukraine being outside the alliance. The West continued its ongoing militarization of Russophobic Kiev regime that was brought to power as a result of a bloody coup, and to use this to wage a hybrid war against our country. Something that has been unprecedented since the end of the Cold War was a recent number of joint exercises between the US and their European NATO allies, inter alia, to develop scenarios for the use of nuclear weapons in the Russian Federation. The stated aim of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, and once and for all, this became crystal clear. The fact that They are clearly hell-bent on their own impunity, and they're bereft of their basic desire for self-preservation. Headed up by Washington, NATO countries not only are expanding and modernizing their offensive capabilities, but also are shifting the armed into space and the information sphere. A new dangerous manifestation of the expansionism was extending the alliance's area of responsibility to the entire eastern side of the world, using the pernicious slogan of the indivisibility of security, the Eurasian and Indo-Asian Pacific region. To this aim, Washington is creating its subordinate military, political mini alliances like AUKUS, the Troika of the US, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, the Quartet, Tokyo, Seoul, Canberra, and Wellington, are pushing the participants of these structures to practical cooperation with NATO. This is bringing its infrastructure into the Pacific area. It is obvious that such efforts are targeted against Russia and China and on the collapse of the inclusive regional architecture of ASEAN. This runs the risk of creating new explosive hotbeds of geopolitical tension, in addition to that which is hotting up very significantly around Europe. One certainly has the impression that the US and the Western collective that is fully subordinate to it had decided to turn the Monroe Doctrine into a global one. These ideas are totally illusory, they're extreme, but the Pax Americana will not stop it. The global minority is doing all it can to put the brakes on the acceleration of the natural course of events. The Vilnius Declaration of NATO on strengthening partnership between Russia and China has been characterized as a threat to NATO. Speaking to his ambassadors abroad, President Macron said he was really concerned about the expansion of BRICS, deeming that this shows that it, quote, complicates the situation in the international sphere in order to runs the risk of weakening the West, in particular Europe. A review of the world order is underway, as is of its principles, and is undermining the way that the West is working. This is the end of that quote. So here's a revelation. If anybody wants to meet without us, become closer without us, or without our consent, then that poses a threat. The pushing of NATO into the Asia-Pacific region is something good, but the expansion of BRICS is dangerous. However, this logic is inexorable. The main trend has become for the global majority to strengthen their national interests, their sovereignty, their traditions, their culture, and their way of life. They don't want to live under anybody's yoke anymore. They want to make friends between themselves, solely on an equal footing and for mutual benefit. And such organizations such as BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization are on the rise, and they are defending their rightful role in forming objectively our multipolar architecture. Perhaps for the first time since 1945, when the UN was established, there is now a chance for genuine democratization of global affairs. This inspires optimism for all those who believe in the rule of law internationally and who want to see the revival of the UN as a central coordinating body for global politics. A body where decisions are made about how to reach decisions together, having a fair balance of interests. For Russia, it is clear that there's no other option. However, the US and its subordinate Western collective are continuing to fuel conflicts, which artificially divide humanity into hostile blocs and hamper the achievement of overall aims. They're doing everything they can to prevent the formation of a genuine multipolar, fair world order. They are trying to force the world to play according to their own self-centered rules. I would like to urge Western politicians and diplomats once again to carefully reread the UN Charter. The cornerstone of the world order, established at the end of the Second World War, is the democratic principle of the sovereign equality of states, large and small, irrespective of their form of government, of their domestic, political, and socio-economic structures. However, the West still believes that it is superior to everybody else. In light of what was said, the pernicious statement by the EU head of diplomacy, Mr. Borrell, namely that Europe is a blossoming garden and the rest is a jungle. He's not bothered by the fact that in the garden there's rampant Islamophobia and other forms of intolerance to traditional values of all world religions, burnings of the Quran, discrimination of the Torah, persecutions of Orthodox clergy, and disdain for the feelings of believers are very commonplace in Europe. A gross violation of the principle of sovereign equality is the use by the West of unilateral coercive measures. Countries which are victims of these illegal sanctions, and there are an increasing number of them, are well aware that restrictions harm first and foremost the most vulnerable strata of society. They provoke crises in the food and energy markets. We continue to insist on a swift and full cessation of the US's unprecedented, inhumane trade and economic financial blockade of Cuba, and for a lifting of the absurd decision to declare Cuba a state sponsor of terrorism. Washington must, without any preconditions, abandon its policy of economic suffocation of Venezuela. We call for the lifting of unilateral sanctions by the US and the EU against Syria that openly undermine its right to development. Any measures that circumvent the UN and that are coercive measures must be ended, as must the West's weaponized practice of manipulating the Security Council sanctioned policies to exert pressure on those they don't like. Something which clearly demonstrates the West's self-centeredness in their attempts to Ukrainize the international agenda by pushing onto the back burner a number of unsettled, unresolved regional conflicts, or crises rather, that many have been in place for decades now. The need in the Middle East really depend on solving the protracted Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on the UN resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative. The Palestinians, for more than 70 years now, have been awaiting their solemnly made promise to them of having their own state. However, the fact that the Americans are monopolizing the mediation process means that they're doing everything they can not to allow this. We call for a pooling of efforts of all responsible countries to create conditions to resume direct Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. We are pleased that the League of Arab States has got its second wind. It's stepping up its role in the region. We welcome the return of Syria to the Arab family, and we welcome the start of the normalization process between Damascus and Ankara, which we are shoring up with our Iranian colleagues. All these positive signs are backed up by the Astana format, which foster the Syrian settlement. We do hope that with the assistance of the UN, the Libyans can prepare for general elections in their long-suffering country that for more than 10 years has not got back on its feet after the NATO aggression that destroyed their state and opened the floodgates for the spread of terrorism to the Sahel region and waves of millions of illegal migrants to Europe and other areas of the world. The analysts have said, as soon as Muammar Gaddafi abandoned his military nuclear program, he was destroyed. Thus, the West has created astonishing risk for the entire nuclear non-proliferation regime. We're concerned by Washington and its Asian allies whipping up hysteria on the Korean Peninsula, where the strategic capabilities of the US are building up. The Russia-Chinese initiative to deem humanitarian and political challenges as a priority have been rejected. There's been a tragic development of the situation in Sudan. It's nothing other than the impact of the failed Western experiment to export its liberal and democratic dogma to the country. We support the constructive initiatives to speed up regulation or rather settlement of the domestic Sudanese conflict by providing assistance to have direct dialogue between the warring parties. When we see the nervous relation of the West to recent events in Africa, in particular Niger and Gabon, one cannot fail to recall how Washington and Brussels responded to the bloody coup in Ukraine in February in 2014. a day after agreement was reached on settling under EU guarantees the issues. But unfortunately, the opposition just trampled on this. The US and its allies supported the coup, hailing it as a demonstration of democracy. We cannot fail to be concerned by the ongoing deteriorating situation in the Serbian province of Kosovo. NATO supplying arms to the Kosovo and helping them to establish an army grossly violates the key resolution of the Security Council 1244. The whole world can see how in the Balkans, the sad story of the Minsk agreements in Ukraine is being repeated. There, I recall, there was stipulation for a special status for the republics in Donbass. However, Kiev openly sabotaged this with the support of the West. Just now as well, the EU does not want to force its Kosovo protégés to implement the agreements that were made between Belgrade and Pristina in 2013 to set up a community of Serbian municipalities of Kosovo. This would have special rules regarding their language and their traditions. In both cases, the EU acted as a guarantor for these agreements. Apparently, they share the same fate. You just need to look at the sponsor and you see the result. Now Brussels is imposing its mediation services, so-called mediation services on Azerbaijan and Armenia, along with Washington, and this is... And in fact, Yerevan and Baku actually did settle the situation. So the time has come for mutual trust building. There are Russian troops who will certainly help this. Now, talking about decisions of the international community that remain on paper, we call for a completion once and for all of the process of decolonization. This is in line with GA resolutions, and we want an end to all colonial and neo-colonial practices. A vivid illustration of the rules according to which the West wants us all to live is the fate of the commitments that were made in 2009 to provide developing countries with $100 billion annually to finance climate mitigation programs. If you compare that fate with the unkept promises and its unkept promises with the sums that the US, NATO and the EU has spent on supporting the racist regime in Kiev, according to reports $170 billion since February 2022, you'll understand what the enlightened West really thinks. It is high time for a reform of the existing global governance architecture. It should be no more artificially holding back of the redistribution of voting quotas in the IMF and the World Bank. The West must recognize the real economic and financial clout of the countries of the global South. It's important also to unblock the work of the WTA disputes body. There's an increasing need to expand the composition of the Security Council solely through eradicating underrepresentation in the composition from the global majority, so countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It's important that the new members of the Security Council, both permanent and non-permanent, are able to use their authority in their own regions as well, and in global organizations such as the Non-Aligned Movement, the G77, and the OIC. It is high time to look at fairer ways of making up the UN Secretariat. One criteria that's been in place for many years, or rather all the criteria that have been in place for many years, do not reflect the actual clout of states in global affairs and artificially ensure excessive dominance of citizens of NATO and EU countries. This disproportionate situation is made even worse by the system of permanent contracts, which links people to positions in host countries of headquarters of international organizations, the overwhelming majority of which are in the capitals that promote Western policies. A new type of UN reform is needed, where there are no leaders and followers or teachers and students, but when all questions are resolved based on consensus, reflecting of balance and of interest. For example, this is really borne by the BRICS, which has expanded its authority, in particular following the Johannesburg summit. And for also at the regional level, there's been a clear renaissance of the African Union, CELAC, the League of Arab States, the GCC, and other structures in Eurasia. A harmonization of integration processes is underway as part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, ASEAN, the CSTO. the Eurasian Economic Community, and the CIS, the Chinese Belt and Road Project. Natural formations for a greater Eurasian partnership is underway as well. This is open to all associations and countries of our shared continent without exception. These positive trends, unfortunately, are being undermined by increasingly aggressive policies by the West and their attempts to maintain their dominance. It is in the common interest to avoid a fragmentation of the world into isolated trade blocs and macro regions. But if the US and its allies do not want to negotiate on making global processes free or fair rather and equal, the rest will have to draw their own conclusions and will have to make their own socio-economic and technological development not dependent on their neocolonial instincts of their former neocolonial powers. The main problem lies with the West because developing countries are prepared to negotiate. For example, in the G20, and we see clearly that the G20 must and should avoid politicization. It should be able to be engaged in methods to develop mutually acceptable ways of governing the world economy and finances. It's important to have dialogue, and we mustn't miss this opportunity. All these trends must fully be borne in mind by the UN Secretariat. Its statutory aim is to seek consent from all member states within the UN and not on the sidelines thereof. The UN was founded following the Second World War, and any attempts to revise this would undermine the foundations of the UN as the representative of a country that made a significant contribution to defeating fascism and the Japanese militarism. I would like to draw attention to the egregious phenomenon of rehabilitating Nazis and collaborators in Europe, in particular in Ukraine and the Baltics. A particularly concerning fact is for the first time last year there was a GA resolution to combat the glorification of Nazism, but for the first time this was voted against by Germany, Italy and Japan. This regrettable fact calls into question the true repentance of these states for the mass crimes carried out against humanity by them during World War II. It also runs counter to the conditions under which they were accepted into the UN as fully fledged members. We strongly urge you to pay particular attention to this metamorphose that runs counter to the position of the global majority and to the principles of the UN Charter. Mr. President, today humanity, as it has done in the past, is at the crossroads. It is entirely up to us how history will play out. It is in our shared interest to prevent a downward spiral into large-scale war and to prevent the final collapse of the mechanisms for international cooperation that were put in place by our predecessors. The SG put forward an initiative next year to hold a summit of the future. This can only be successful by having a fair balance of interests of all member states with the respect of the intergovernmental character of our organization. At our meeting on the 21st of September, the members of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter actively discussed the opportunities for achieving this. As Antonio Guterres said at the press conference on the eve of this session, and I quote, "If we want peace and prosperity based on equality and solidarity, then leaders have a particular responsibility to achieve compromise when designing our common future for our common good." End of quote. This is an excellent response to those who divide the world up into democracies and autocracies and dictate their neocolonial rules to others. Thank you very much.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Retno Lestari Prisansari Madusi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. You'll have amended the text. Yeah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Excellencies, dear colleagues, today I'm wearing a traditional fabric from East Nusa Tenggara, Indonesia, while my delegation are wearing different traditional fabric representing the diversity of over 1,000 ethnicities in Indonesia. We are diverse, but we are one. Mr. President, the world now is at strategic crossroads. Global solidarity and collective responsibility are the only answer to address trust deficit and global inequality. This is the main essence transpired by the Bandung Conference or Asia-Africa Conference in 1955. Through the 10 principles of Bandung, we call for respect toward human rights and the UN Charter, sovereignty and territorial integrity, equality of all races and all nations, peaceful settlement of dispute, and promotion of mutual interest and cooperation. The Bandung Conference reminded every country of their equal rights and responsibility in maintaining peace and stability, mainstreaming win-win cooperation, and championing solidarity. Indonesia bring along the Bandung spirit when we presided the G20 last year, chairmanship of ASEAN this year, during President Jokowi's visit to Africa last month, and we will bring this spirit everywhere we go, including to this UNGA. The Bandung spirit enables Indonesia to listen and become part of solution. For Indonesia, global leadership should not only be about power or about the influence to dictate others. Instead, global leadership should be about listening to others, building bridges, respecting international law consistently, and put all nations equally. Mr. President, Excellencies, rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity is the theme for this year's UNGA. This theme is timely and on point. We are again at the strategic crossroad as in 1955. Trust deficit reappears, lack of solidarity resurfaces. This situation has hampered the attainment of SDGs, especially for countries in the global south. The question is, do we really have the commitment to rebuild trust, to reignite global solidarity, to attain the SDGs target together? Will our presence today at the UNGA really bring commitment and show readiness toward a global unity and collective responsibility? Standing before this esteemed assembly of the UN, we said a lot of good words and promises. Let us now be honest with ourselves. Do we do what we said we would do? If all of us are committed to do what we said and say what we do, I'm sure the current world situation will not be like what we see right now, where trust deficit is running deep, where differences are soaring high and sharp, where wars and conflict are tearing us apart. The problem is that we do differently than what we said. We say differently about what we did. We do not walk the talk. Mr. President, Excellencies, against this backdrop, I would like to share some thought on how we can rebuild trust and reignite global solidarity in line with what we envision through the Bandung spirit. First, forging collective global leadership. The fate of the world cannot be defined by the mighty few. A peaceful, stable, and prosperous world is a collective right and responsibility of all countries. big and small, north and south, developed and developing. We all must do our part and work together toward this common goal. And this can only be achieved if all of us adhere to the same rules of the game. We must uphold respect for international law, particularly fundamental principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity. This will ensure that disputes will be settled on the negotiating table rather than at the battlefield. A collective responsibility is also needed to the people of Palestine and Afghanistan. For far too long, we have allowed our Palestinian brothers and sisters to suffer. Indonesia will not back an inch in our support for Palestinian statehood. In Afghanistan, Indonesia will do its utmost to help the Afghan people and ensure the rights of women and girls are respected, including their right to education. Second, advocating development for all. Colleagues, every country has the same right to develop and grow. But the global architecture of today only benefits the selected few. Trade discrimination against developing countries continues to happen. Global supply chain is being monopolized by certain countries. Many developing countries may not meet the SDGs by 2030. They also struggle with foreign debt and development financing. All of this would contribute to eroding trust and solidarity. Therefore, it is time for us to make a real change. Industrial downstreaming must not be an exclusive call of developing countries. Developed countries should also support this call to build a stronger future together. The same ideals are applicable in our fight against climate change and sea level rise, as well as safeguarding biodiversity. Indonesia has led by example by fulfilling its international obligation, including being among early signatories of the BBNJ agreement. But developing countries cannot do this by themselves. We need developed countries also to fulfill their responsibility, including on climate financing, green investment, and transfer of technology. Technology and innovation should not be exclusive for the selected few. Access to safe and secure digital technology for developing countries, including AI, is crucial for future sustainable growth. This is time to practice what we have preached. Third, reinforcing regional cooperation. Colleagues, regional institutions should be net contributors and building blocks for global peace and prosperity. As the ASEAN chair this year, Indonesia had to navigate ASEAN through such geopolitical dynamics in the region. ASEAN has already managed to do this for the last 5 decades. We send a clear message that we will not let our region to be a pawn of rivalries. Instead, Southeast Asia must be an epicentrum of growth where all countries can benefit meaningfully. Inclusivity will forever be the pillar of our region's architecture building. It is sufficient to say we managed to pull through. ASEAN have maintained its unity and established a long-term vision for ASEAN 2045. ASEAN have reinforced its centrality in strengthening regional resilience and preparing for economy of the future. ASEAN have initiated closer partnership with the Pacific Island Forum and the Indian Ocean Rim Association for a stable and peaceful Indo-Pacific. We translated the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific into concrete and inclusive cooperation. On Myanmar, implementation of the 5 points of consensus remains the main reference. ASEAN continues to urge the military junta to implement it. ASEAN will spare no effort to ensure the people of Myanmar are not left alone. Mr. President, before I conclude, I wish to underline a point on the reform of our multilateral system. Many proposals have been produced throughout the years, but we are still far from getting anywhere. The best time for action may have already passed, but the second best time is now. Let us translate our commitment into action. The 2024 Summit of the Future cannot fail. Trust and solidarity must be part of this effort. Our people and the world await, and we must deliver. I thank you very much.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Alicia Bárcena Ibarra, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mexico.
Señor Presidente, Denis Francis, amigo.
Mr. President Denis Francis, friend, please receive from Mexico our brotherly congratulations on your election to the presidency. Latin America and the Caribbean feel fully represented under your presidency. That presidency is a demonstration of our region's commitment to the purposes of this wonderful organization. Mr. President, heads of state and government, colleagues, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today the United Nations has before it a challenge of colossal proportions to discharge the very essence of its mandate, sparing humankind from the scourge of war, promoting and protecting all human rights, ensuring adherence to international law, and promoting the well-being of people underpinned by environmental sustainability. I am deeply moved to return to the headquarters of this United Nations organization. I served this organization with pride for decades, and I'm moved to return now representing the government of my country, Mexico, a country that is a deep honor. Mexico is a country which today is in the midst of wholesale and progressive transformations. I am delighted to represent Mexico before the world and let its voice ring out before you. Please receive the warm greetings of our President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Our people are facing grave threats to international peace and security. We have more than 50 armed conflicts raging, and we're seeing the proliferation of nuclear weapons, the worsening of myriad crises ranging from humanitarian to climate crises. There is the forced migration of millions of people. We're seeing the highest spike ever in inequality and poverty, with 165 million new people falling into poverty in 3 years. There is the health posed by and the risk of new pandemics. Against this backdrop, incidentally, growing numbers of people are calling into question the relevance of multilateralism and its institutions. However, there is no doubt whatsoever that our international action loses legitimacy when our resolutions do not translate into concrete benefits for people, for the planet, for prosperity. Agenda 2030 requires urgent action to rescue it. To use the words of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres himself, the pandemic hampered our progress towards fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals. However, our trajectory before the pandemic was not an encouraging one, and the current context of macroeconomic and political uncertainty requires ambitious and immediate measures. Stagnating progress towards the fulfillment of the SDGs is not a mere figure of speech. We're talking about hundreds of millions of of people living in poverty, food insecurity for boys and girls, as well as an environment in crisis. The future of people and the planet is not in the hands of fate. Rather, it depends on the political decisions and actions that we take, guided by Agenda 2030. And here, inequality is the major challenge, because it's not sufficient to reduce poverty. We need a shift in our development paradigm towards one which redistributes power and wealth, and one which narrows the unacceptable gaps and asymmetries between the rich and the poor and between countries. Equality is not simply a matter of being the subject of rights. Inequality is inefficient from an economic perspective, and therefore we need to become equal to grow, and we need to grow to become equal, because we're no longer in a time of change. We're witnessing our time changing itself. Our epoch is changing, and that means we need to rethink development and place equality at the heart of our work. Both at a national and international level, achieving the SDGs depends on having a vision underpinned by social justice and solidarity, and that includes the commensurate mobilization of necessary financial resources and the relevant necessary reform of IFIs. In the face of this complex backdrop, Mexico will continue to draw strength and inspiration for its international action from the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, because the institutional architecture which we built almost 80 years ago now to channel international cooperation is there, and Mexico has led and will continue to propose any and all initiatives which seek to improve the lives of current and present generations. We will champion lasting, genuine peace and security. We will champion egalitarian sustainable development, resilient and inclusive development, and the unconditional full respect for all human rights. The desire for transformation and the action of our government has now turned precisely towards transforming our development model to create more and better public goods, to guarantee rights accompanied by fiscal responsibilities, and all of this on the basis of one core premise: for the good of all, first and foremost for the poor. Our government has demonstrated the urgent need to restore the role of the state, to regulate relations between the market, the state and society, and to implement transformative structural policies. We need to return hope to our people, the hope of a country which is more just and egalitarian, to leave no one behind nor anyone on the margins. And in the last few years, we've managed to lift some 5 million people out of poverty. We have witnessed the greatest rise in the minimum wage in our history, and we have a dense network of social programs that extend to all sectors of society. But we're inspiring to usher in a vision of equality